Chapter 11. You are listening at Novel Full. Audio. Encountering a wolf. Lu Zay's guess was right. At midnight, there was really a riot not far from the refugee gathering place. In order to snatch the water and food that they relied on to survive, these people often did even more cruel things. After all, it was difficult for many people to imagine what these refugees who left their hometowns and escaped to the capital had experienced. However, although this riot happened suddenly, it didn't last long before the soldiers came over to stop it. However, they only stopped them. The soldiers didn't help to recover the water and food that had been snatched from the victims. Therefore, from a certain perspective, not only did they not stop the evil deeds that had begun to spread, but they also helped the wicked. The next day was the third day. This kind of robbery of other people's water and food was becoming more and more blatant. Seeing that this behavior was spreading like wildfire, families with a few men like Mrs. Luo's family also began to gather with familiar families. They either went to snatch other people's food together or defended their families together. Seeing that this conflict was getting more and more intense, the first to lose their cool were the officials who followed Pei Qian and were responsible for escorting this group of refugees to the north. The journey was too long, so it was normal to lose people. However, if they lost too many people, they would have to suffer. Prince, more than 40 refugees have been killed or injured in the past 2 days. If we don't stop them now, we might not be able to control the situation anymore. The official in the lead approached Pei Qian, who was sitting upright in the tent. The bearded man was so anxious that he was about to cry. Previously, a group had already been executed on the way. In addition to the few who had died of illness midway, there were more than 100 casualties now. If this continued, how were they going to explain themselves? Lord Wu, what's the hurry? Pei Qian played with an extremely luxurious dagger in his hand. After listening to Lord Wu's pleading for a long time, he slowly said, "Let me ask you, who do you think is the most dangerous and difficult to control among the people we're escorting this time?" Of course it's those felons who have to be sent to the border. Lord Wu thought for a moment and replied subconsciously. Wrong. Those are felons, but many of them are from prominent families. Although their crimes are serious, most of them grew up in rich families. It's easy for them to kneel down and kowtow, but it's too much to ask them to stand up and resist. Pei Qian pulled out his dagger. The sharp blade reflected the sly smile on his face, making Lord Wu shiver. The most dangerous people are actually hidden among these refugees. The 4 counties in the capital had a drought and locusts passed through. In many of the farms, no one was spared in the end. All of them starved to death at home. How do you think these people who could escape safely to the capital survived on the way? Pei Qian looked at Lord Wu and was satisfied to see him break out in cold sweat. He chuckled confidently. These people must be dug out and eliminated. What we're going to transport to the northern border is a herd of sheep. Even if there are fewer people, at least they will be easy to control. But if you send this pack of wolves to the northern border, what if they cause trouble in the future? Lord Wu, you want to just get a beating. You'll lose your head. After saying this, Pei Qian didn't stay in the tent for long. Instead, he slowly walked out of the tent and asked Qian He, who was guarding the door, "How's the surveillance on those 2? Your Highness, they have gathered with a few familiar families. As long as others don't cause trouble for them, they won't take the initiative to cause trouble. However, if they take the initiative to provoke them, they won't hesitate to attack. These refugees are really as you said, Your Highness. None of them are easy to deal with." Hearing his master's question, Qian He quickly lowered his head and replied. "In another 2 days, we'll be able to pass through this sandbar. Keep an eye on them with the people below. Don't let any of them off." After warming up his wrist, Pei Qian looked at the camp not far away that was flickering with bonfires and said coldly, "Also, continue to keep an eye on those 2 people. If there are any strange movements, report it immediately." Lin Suisui didn't know that Pei Qian hadn't given up on monitoring them even though the situation was already so dangerous. However, she couldn't be bothered to think about this at this moment because the water she and Lu Zhe had stored was about to run out. No matter how thrifty they were, they could only last for a day at most. Fortunately, there was always a way out. She found a large forest of saxaws not far from her stop today. Under the cover of the night, Lin Suisui decided to try her luck in this forest. What she was looking for were the herbs that parasitize the roots of plants like the Saxoliang locking and flesh weed. These two plants could be used as medicine, but before they were processed into medicinal herbs, they contained a lot of water. If they could find some, not only could they quench their thirst, but they could also satisfy their hunger. Originally, Lin Suisui planned to go alone, but Lu Zhe was worried, so in the end, the two of them took advantage of the moonlight and quietly entered the forest. Lin Suisui was really lucky. Not long after she entered, she really found a few yang locking plants that could resolve the urgent situation. As she whispered to Lu Zhe about the use of these plants, she quickly dug them out of the sand dune and placed them in the basket on her back. This forest wasn't big, so it didn't take long for Lin Suisui to search through the entire place. She dug up half a basket of plants that could be used to quench thirst. It was worth the trip. Just as she stood up after digging up the last cistanche and was about to call Lu Zhe, who was guarding not far from her, to return to the camp, she was shocked to discover that Lu Zhe's expression had changed. Don't move. The man's voice was soft, but it carried a sense of deterrence. Although she didn't know what was going on, Lin Suisui chose to do as she was told. With a ripping sound, Lu Zhe quickly lit the match. In the next second, the crude dagger in his hand slid past Lin Sui's side and stabbed behind her like a meteor. Lin Suisui reacted quickly. Hearing the wail behind her, she took the opportunity to run to Lu Zhe's side and was pulled behind him. It was also at this moment that Lin Suisui saw that the thing that had just appeared behind her was actually a wolf that looked thin but had an extremely fierce glint in its eyes. Chapter 12. You are listening at NovelFull.audio. Escape wolves lived in groups, not to mention that the environment here was so harsh. In just a few seconds, several small green lanterns lit up in the dark night not far away. Lin Suisui suppressed the fear and uneasiness in her heart and counted carefully. At this moment, they were facing 9 wolves. Even if the short knife that had just injured the alpha wolf was still in Lu Zhe's hand, it was still dangerous to deal with such a pack of wolves. They had to think of something. You go first. Lu Zhe protected Lin Suisui and slowly retreated while instructing her to leave quickly. The wolf pack was ferocious. Not only would she be of no help if she stayed here, but she would also be in danger and the target of the wolf pack's attack. Previously, when he faced enemies in the western region, he had encountered these beasts. They were cunning and ruthless. As long as they smelled some blood, they would bite them to death. Moreover, this type of beast was also vengeful. He had just injured the alpha wolf, so this grudge wouldn't end until one party died. If they didn't end it here today, these wolves would probably chase after them relentlessly. It would be even more troublesome. The wolves are afraid of fire. Lin Suisui swallowed, but didn't leave quickly as Lu Zhe had requested. Instead, she reached out and snatched the match from Lu Zhe's hand. I'll light the fire. There were many dead branches in this forest to begin with, so it wasn't difficult to light them up. Moreover, Lin Suisui wasn't only lighting them up to scare the wolves, but also to attract the attention of the people in the camp. As Lin Suisui had expected, the sudden spread of the fire did stop the approaching wolves from continuing forward, but they didn't give up and move away. It was as if they knew that this forest would burn out sooner or later. They were very patiently guarding not far away, waiting for the flames to extinguish so that they could swarm forward and give the 2 humans in front of them a fatal blow. This fire can only scare these animals away for the time being. It won't last long. Lu Zhe protected Lin Suisui and continued to retreat in the direction of the camp. Although he didn't stop her from continuing to burn the fire, he didn't place all his hopes on the flames that might extinguish at any time. When we reach the edge of this forest later, run towards the camp quickly. Lu Zhe had already prepared for the worst outcome. He would send Lin Suisui away first before turning around to fight these beasts to the death. Lin Suisui naturally didn't want to leave Lu Zhe here alone and escape, but she also knew that staying behind wouldn't help Lu Zhe at all. Instead, she would be the greatest burden. She gritted her teeth. Just as she was thinking about igniting the remaining Saxol forest and running back to get reinforcements, the arrow shot from the air behind her had already pierced the male wolf closest to her with extreme accuracy. Whoosh! 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 Immediately after, a few more arrows tore through the air and accurately hit the remaining wolves that were unwilling to give up. The remaining wolves naturally understood that the opponent in front of them wasn't to be trifled with. After a low whimper, the remaining wolves quickly retreated into the desert. What are you guys doing here? Pei Qian held his bow and stopped his horse beside Lin Suisui and Lu Zhe. He looked at Lin Suisui, who was tightly protected by Lu Zhe because she was too frightened, and then at the man who had just escaped from the wolf's mouth but didn't look frightened. He frowned slightly and felt that this scene was a little eye-catching. We came to the forest to see if we could find a water source. Lu Zhe's voice was slightly hoarse, but he answered the question quickly, not giving Pei Qian a chance to make a fuss. Is that so? I thought you were trying to escape. Pei Qian glanced at the two people who were surrounded by the soldiers he had brought over and said arrogantly. Sir, you've misunderstood. If we really wanted to run, we wouldn't have left the camp without taking our luggage. Lu Zhe lowered his head and whispered to Pei Qian. Pei Qian sneered but didn't continue asking. Instead, he looked at Lu Zhe meaningfully. You're quite calm. If it were anyone else, they would have peed their pants in fear when facing the wolf pack. It's rare for the woman in your arms to be able to survive until now. Country bumpkins don't deserve a compliment. I've just seen a lot of them since I was born, so I've gained some understanding of them. Lu Zhe patted Lin Sui's back gently to comfort her as he replied to Pei Qian's probing. Pei Qian rode back to the camp. Lu Zhe and Lin Suisui also returned to the camp with the soldiers. Because they had made too much noise, they had just returned to their tents when Mrs. Luo rushed over when she heard the commotion. She said to Lin Suisui with a worried expression, "Why did you guys leave the camp at such a late hour? It's so dangerous. I saw a forest when I stayed here today. I heard from the old man that if there's no water in the desert, we can dig along the roots of this forest. We might be able to dig out water, that I wanted to try my luck with my husband. Who would have thought that we would encounter a wolf pack?" Lin Suisui replied to Mrs. Luo softly with a look of lingering fear. Mrs. Luo didn't suspect anything. As she reached out to help Lin Suisui pat off the dust on her clothes, she carefully stuffed a small clay pot in her sleeve into Lin Suisui's hand. There's not much water, so I can't give you too much. Take it first. If we hold on a little longer, we might be able to walk out tomorrow. No, I can't. Lin Suisui didn't expect Mrs. Luo to secretly send this bottle of water over at such a difficult time. She subconsciously wanted to refuse, but Mrs. Luo quickly stopped her. We've been helping each other along the way. If your husband hadn't protected us when we entered the mountain last time, we would have suffered a huge loss. Keep it quickly. Don't let anyone see it. It's getting late. We still have to travel tomorrow morning. I won't disturb your rest anymore. I'll go back first. After Mrs. Luo instructed Lin Suisui, she got up and returned to her tent. Lin Suisui reached out and touched the small clay pot in her sleeve. For a moment, she felt that this small and exquisite clay pot seemed to weigh 1,000 kilograms. There's no need to be troubled. We can just repay this favor in the future. Lu Zhe saw that Lin Suisui was holding the clay pot in her sleeve with a troubled expression, but he didn't feel as conflicted as she did. Instead, he said gently, "We still have a chance to interact in the future. We can return it." Chapter 13. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Shameless. Soon, Lin Suisui found out what the first gift Lu Zhe sent to Mrs. Luo's family was. After comforting Lin Suisui, he got up and went to look for Aunt Lin's husband, Uncle Song, her 2 sons, and the few families that had previously joined forces with them. Unlike before, when they had secretly left the camp, this time, they were prepared. Soon, when they returned, they brought back the corpses of the 5 wolves. Although these 5 wild wolves were a little thin, at this moment, they were undoubtedly life-saving food for people like them who lacked food. The families moved quickly. Before anyone could react, they had already dealt with the wolves by the camp. Lu Zhe only wanted 2 wolf skins and 2 wolf legs. The rest were not wasted and were quickly divided up by the families. It was naturally impossible to hide such a huge commotion from others. Aren't you afraid that those people will come and snatch it? Lin Suisui looked out from the gap in the tent and saw the families sharing the food. She was a little worried. For the past 2 days, some had almost lost their lives merely over half a sesame seed cake. What was in front of them was meat. If we hide it, someone might really come and snatch it. Unlike Lin Suisui, who was worried, Lu Zhe was very open-minded about this matter. Or rather, he had already planned it and was confident. These people have all survived the escape. In order to survive, the things they have done are beyond your imagination. By putting this matter out in the open today, we're actually telling those people that since we can put these things out in the open, it's obvious that we're not afraid of them finding trouble. Lu Zhe narrowed his eyes. He knew Pei Qian's plan very well. In the end, less than 30% of these refugees would be able to settle down in the northern region. As for those fierce troublemakers, they would be dealt with by Pei Qian on the way. The reason why Pei Qian hadn't made a move yet was probably because he was waiting for the right time. However, no matter what Pei Qian thought, as long as they stayed put, Pei Qian wouldn't do anything to them for the time being. Just as Lu Zhe had confirmed, although almost the entire refugee camp had seen the process of them splitting the meat, no one really came forward to snatch it. They only came over to snatch the leftovers after they took the majority. The commotion during the night didn't affect their journey the next day. However, Lin Suisui, who was walking on the road, clearly felt the scrutinizing and even jealous gazes of the surrounding refugees. Compared to the other families in their small group, Lu Zhe and Lin Suisui looked the weakest and easiest to deal with. If they could succeed, at least the 2 wolf legs in their basket would be able to relieve the urgent need for food in many families. This malice festered along the way until it reached its peak when they camped in the evening. However, Lin Suisui didn't expect the other party's method to be this. After the bonfire was started, the first to come over were actually a few children. The oldest looked to be 5 or 6 years old, and the youngest was even in the arms of her siblings. During this period of time, there was no way to guarantee the amount of water they could drink, let alone take showers. Therefore, these children had sallow faces and pitiful looks. This move was really despicable and shameless. After understanding the schemes of the adults behind these children, Lin Suisui was furious. She was actually not a cold-hearted person, but that didn't mean that she was willing to be threatened and give up her life for nothing. She knew very well that many people in the camp were staring at her. As long as she took out a little food for these children, more children would come over and beg her for help. Therefore, Lin Suisui only thought for a moment before having an idea. Instead of roasting the 2 wolf legs as she'd planned, she took a piece of the yang locking she'd dug up in the forest of Saxaw yesterday from her basket. Without looking at the children, she got up and walked to Lu Zhe, who was setting up the tent, and gave him most of it. Lu Zhe glanced at the row of children who were staring at them not far away and didn't say anything. He took the food from Lin Suisui and felt that it was fine to make do with a meal tonight. However, their arrangements were unacceptable in the eyes of the parents who had instructed their children to come over and ask for food. If they didn't roast the wolf leg today, wouldn't their children have gone over for nothing? Why are the two of you so cold-blooded? How much can these children eat? If they weren't so hungry, would they have come to you for help? It's said that saving a life is better than building a 7-storied pagoda. Is your heart made of stone? A woman took a few steps over and protected one of the boys. She criticized Lin Suisui and Lu Zhe angrily. Lin Suisui was actually filled with anger at this moment. Hearing this woman's words, she couldn't be bothered to endure it anymore. She stood up and faced the woman's angry gaze. You're so unreasonable. Are we very familiar? We don't even know each other. Why should I take out our life? Saving food to fill your stomachs. Who wouldn't feel sorry for their own family? You feel sorry for your child, but I also feel sorry for my husband who hasn't eaten his fill after traveling for so long. If you're really greedy for the food in our hands, there are many wild wolves outside the camp. Why don't you let your husband hunt a few? It saves you from coveting other people's food. Lin Suisui's words immediately made the woman blush. She was so angry that she almost fainted. It took her a long time to recover. She scolded angrily, You evil-hearted person, do you know how powerful the wild wolves outside are? You actually asked my husband to hunt wolves. What are you thinking? Oh, so you also know that the wild wolves outside are fierce and cunning. Then why should the wolf meat that my husband risked his life to get be given to you for free? You look like you're already so old. Why are you so evil? Lin Suisui was waiting for her to say this and scolded her back. Chapter 14 You are listening at NovelFull.audio. Do you feel happy now? To be able to think of letting her child take the lead to freeload and get benefits, this woman was clearly an expert in taking advantage of people. Therefore, even if Lin Suisui's words were unpleasant, she didn't leave. Lu Zhe, who had been silent all this while, slowly took out the short knife and threw it in front of the woman. If you want it, cut it yourself. Looking at the short knife that landed in front of her with a clang, the woman subconsciously protected her child and took a few steps back before standing still. She wanted some benefits, but she didn't want to risk her life. Seeing that this man wasn't to be trifled with, she wasn't stupid enough to think that he wanted her to cut the meat herself out of kindness. However, a man wouldn't go against a woman like her, right? The woman stood there in a dilemma, wondering if she should go forward and try her luck. However, Lu Zhe didn't give her much time. He looked up and growled fiercely, Get lost. Not to mention the woman, even the children standing at the side could no longer hold back. They quickly turned around and fled in a sorry state. After sending these people away, Lu Zhe didn't hesitate anymore. He took out the wolf leg and set up a bonfire to roast. It was undeniable that Lu Zhe's method was really arrogant, but it was also intimidating enough that those envious people beside him had no choice but to refrain. The dinner was uneventful, but compared to Lu Zhe and the other refugees in the circle were having a hard time. This commotion even alarmed Pei Qian, who had arranged for people to keep an eye on them. They sure know how to intimidate others. Pei Qian sat in front of the grill and didn't look up when he heard Qian He's report. He continued to slowly slice a wild rabbit while leaning against the wall with the gold inlaid dagger in his hand. The thin slices of meat were placed in a porcelain dish beside him, but he was in no hurry to eat them. He seemed to enjoy the process of cutting the meat piece by piece. Find a few people and try to test them again before leaving this area. After a while, Pei Qian continued to instruct indifferently, if anything goes wrong, eliminate them together. Qian He agreed and bowed as he left the tent. Perhaps it was because they had endured for another day or two and were almost at the edge of this desolate hill, but there wasn't only a small river beside the campsite that night, but also a large number of green plants along the river. It was like a paradise in the sand dunes. The refugees, who had been thirsty for half a month, were almost going crazy with joy. Even those who were usually mean had rare smiles on their faces at this moment. As they filled up the pottery jars with water, they also worried about what to eat for dinner. This field was lush, so there were naturally edible wild vegetables inside. Lin Suisui, Mrs. Luo, and the others left the camp with baskets and went to the nearby pasture to search for edible wild vegetables and fruits. After being vigilant for so many days, they finally relaxed and had fun. Therefore, Lin Suisui didn't expect that although no one took the initiative to find trouble with her when food was scarce previously, now that the crisis had been resolved, some people would actually take the initiative to find trouble with her. Looking at the 5 fierce-looking men surrounding her, Lin Suisui took 2 steps back warily. She forced herself to maintain her composure and stared at the man in the lead. She probed, "What do you want?" The 5 men formed a circle and approached Lin Suisui with wretched expressions. The one in the lead didn't hide the desire on his face at all. He chuckled and sized up Lin Suisui with his small eyes. "What are we doing?" "Of course, I want you to accompany us." The man's words attracted laughter from the others around him. In their opinion, the young lady in front of them was no different from a lamb in their hands. They could do whatever they wanted. The higher-ups wanted to test the strength of this couple, but in their opinion, the only person they wanted to test was this woman's husband. Then, what could arouse that person's true nature more than laying a hand on this woman? No matter how the couple's relationship was, no man would be willing to get cuckolded. At that time, they would have fun and the matter would be settled. Wouldn't it be perfect? Think about it. What is the best way for us to have a good time? Of course, Lin Suisui didn't really think that these people in front of her were here to cause trouble because of their lust, so she quickly calmed down. She cooperated quietly with the other party. Initially, the men thought that the little girl in front of them would cry and scream in fear, but they didn't expect her to be so cooperative. This made them mutter. Could it be that this woman was a feisty person to begin with? If that was the case, the man in the lead didn't think too much about it. Although the woman in front of him looked a little ordinary, she was young. At this moment, he couldn't be picky. He rubbed his hands with a smile and pounced on Lin Suisui while muttering, "I love you." Before the few accomplices who were waiting to see the scene could cheer for their boss, they were stunned by their boss' scream. When the few of them reacted, they saw that the originally timid little woman now looked ruthless. One of her arms was clamped around their boss's neck, and the long hairpin in her other hand had already pierced into their boss's neck. With his figure, it should be impossible for him to be subdued so easily by this woman. However, this woman was really vicious and cruel. She actually poked their boss eye with a hairpin. While he was in so much pain that he had no time to care about anything else, she attacked again and stabbed him in the neck. Therefore, the leader, who was in unbearable pain, didn't dare to struggle anymore. He could only cooperate with Lin Suisui and shrink his body. He cooperated with her movements in a comical manner since he was afraid that he would be attacked by her again. And it wasn't that he didn't want to resist, but for some reason, he felt more and more weak. It was almost difficult to stand it. "Do you feel happy now?" Lin Suisui smiled and asked the boss, who was on the brink of death. Her gentle and soft tone made him feel terrified. Chapter 15. You are listening at NovelFull.audio. Just a moment. The silver hairpin in Lin Suisui's hand was secretly bought after she arrived at the refugee camp. Later on, she encountered a few herbs that could be used to make anesthetic, so she made these relatively simple tools to protect herself. She didn't expect them to be used so quickly. She didn't expect this method to allow her to escape from these men, but at least it could stall for time until Lu Zhe found her. Just as Lin Suisui had guessed, the men opposite her were only shocked for a moment. After they reacted, they no longer took this fierce-looking woman seriously. The reason their leader had ended up in such a miserable state was because he had underestimated his opponent and let this little girl take advantage of him. Now that they were already prepared, how could this girl defeat them? Seeing that their leader had completely fainted and lost the ability to resist, Lin Suisui quickly pulled out her hairpin without hesitation and confronted the men who were surrounding her. Just as Lin Suisui felt that the odds were against her, the man who had already rushed in front of her suddenly stopped in his tracks. He seemed to have suffered a heavy blow and fell in front of Lin Suisui. His accomplice, who was very close to him, didn't expect this. Just as he was about to turn around and investigate the situation, he fell to the ground without any warning. Like his companion, who had fallen first, he didn't even scream. What's going on? The remaining two men were completely frightened by this situation. They only knew some petty tricks in the first place. If it weren't for the higher-ups instructions, they wouldn't have the guts to come. Therefore, when they realized that the situation wasn't right, the two of them couldn't care less about staying behind to complete the mission. They only wanted to turn around and escape. But most of the time, people had no control over how things ended. They turned around and saw the man walking over from the horizon, his back to the light. Although the man was at least 100 meters away from them, his aura made the two hooligans lose their strength. They heard two thuds. The two men, who had been strutting around in a cocky manner just now, were now as humble as lap dogs. They cried and kowtowed to Lin Suisui, who was still standing there without moving. They begged for mercy with tears flowing down their faces. This is all a misunderstanding. They forced us to cause trouble for you. We didn't dare to. Please, spare us this time. We won't do it again. The two of them cried until their voices were hoarse, but Lin Suisui didn't respond. Instead, Lu Zhe, who was looking for them in the distance, came. Lu Zhe's shadow was elongated by the light of the dusk behind him and cast on the two hooligans who were still kneeling on the ground, exuding a suffocating pressure. The two hooligans were so frightened that they trembled and fell to the ground while waiting for the man's final judgment in despair. However, to their surprise, Lu Zhe didn't attack them. Instead, he walked to Lin Suisui expressionlessly. He lowered his head and his dark and deep eyes landed on the little girl's eyelashes that flickered with uneasiness and panic. Without a word, he raised his hand and gently wiped the blood from her cheeks with the handkerchief he was holding. He moved slowly and gently, as if he were looking at some extremely precious and fragile porcelain treasure. Only when he had completely wiped the blood off her face did he end the torture that had been especially torturous for the two people lying on the ground. As if he had been delayed for too long, the boss, who had fainted because of Qianqian's paralysis, finally woke up from his temporary coma. He struggled to get up and cursed as he looked up to call his companions. However, before he could say anything, he met a pair of sinister eyes. The man actually looked very ordinary. He was the kind of person who definitely wouldn't attract anyone's attention if he was thrown into a group of refugees. However, at this moment, his gaze was sinister and terrifying, like that of a ghost from hell. He knew this man. He was the person he wanted to test. The leader wanted to say something, but Lu Zhe didn't give him the chance. Lu Zhe only instructed Lin Suisui in a low voice to turn around, and close her eyes. Then, Lu Zhe turned around and kicked his chest heavily. Lu Zhe used a lot of strength. The muffled sound of his punches hitting flesh brought about the screams of the three people. Lin Suisui, who was still hesitating, immediately obeyed. She turned around and closed her eyes. She heard the screams become softer and softer until it became completely silent. The surroundings fell silent. Husband. Lin Suisui closed her eyes. In this dead silence, she felt flustered. She subconsciously wanted to turn around, but she heard Lu Zhe say in an extremely faint voice, "I'm here. Don't look back. I'll be fine in a while." Lu Zhe slowly wiped the blood off his hands and looked down at the three corpses lying on the ground. Their heads were almost deformed. The violence and impulse that had accumulated in his heart for so many days finally eased a little. However, he didn't want the little girl, who was standing with her back facing him, to see this scene. "Are you done?" When Lin Suisui heard Lu Zhe's response, she finally relaxed. When she spoke again, her tone subconsciously became more relaxed. "I saw Mrs. Luo giving me a look. I believed that you would definitely come. What if I hadn't come? Lin Suesue's trust made Lu Zhe, who was wiping the blood off his hands, pause slightly. He was really surprised by the girl's thoughts and decision. Just forgetting the past would really change a person's personality overnight. I still have medicinal powder. Lin Suesue chuckled. She didn't choose to hide it from Lu Zhe and simply told him her backup plan. But I didn't think you'd abandon me. You're injured. Lin Suesue felt the man's footsteps approaching and naturally smelled the thick smell of blood on him. She couldn't help but frown worriedly. She immediately opened her eyes to check Lu Zhe's injuries, but she met a pair of dark and emotionless eyes. I'm fine. It's all their blood. Lu Zhe didn't get too close to Lin Suesue. In fact, when Lin Suesue took the initiative to approach him, he quickly took a step back. I'm dirty. Don't get the blood on you. Chapter 16. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Suffering together naturally, the commotion here couldn't escape Pei Qian's eyes. Therefore, when Lu Zhe and Lin Suesue returned to the edge of the camp, Pei Qian and a group of guards had already been waiting by the camp for a long time. Just like what Pei Qian often did in the tent, he was sitting in front of the bonfire, holding his usual short dagger and slowly cutting the yellow mutton on the grill. Seeing Lu Zhe and the others, he only raised his hand slightly and instructed indifferently, sit. Across from Pei Qian's seat, there were two folding stools that had been prepared long ago. It was obvious that they had expected them to come, so they had been prepared in advance. Lu Zhe reached out to support Lin Suesue and sent her to sit by the bonfire. Then, he slowly sat down beside Lin Suesue. I didn't expect an ordinary villager like you to be so skilled. Pei Qian said slowly as he gestured for Qian He to bring the plate of meat he had sliced over to Lin Suesue. You flatter me, but those people are all thugs. I've also learned a few martial arts moves from my father and brothers since I was young. I've always relied on hunting to survive in my hometown, so I'm a little more agile than others. Lu Zhe lowered his eyes slightly and replied in a low voice. From his behavior, he didn't look like a murderer who had just killed 5 people alone. No matter what, it's a fact that you killed people. According to the rules, I should feed you to the wolves like those people who caused trouble previously. However, I've always cherished talent. I'm willing to give you a way out. The reason you were so ruthless was because those people wanted to attack the young lady beside you. In that case, it wasn't an exaggeration to say that she was the culprit. Therefore, as long as you kill this scourge, not only will I forgive you, but I will also allow you to serve me from now on. How about that? As soon as Pei Qian said this, Lu Zhe didn't react, but Lin Suesue almost lost her composure and jumped up from her seat. However, when she thought of the identity of the person opposite her, Lin Suesue suppressed her anger and turned to look at Lu Zhe, who was sitting beside her in panic. She looked like a little sheep that was about to be abandoned. Why? Is this decision difficult? Pei Qian looked up slightly and his smile became more and more malicious. Ruthlessness is the mark of a truly great man. Besides, I think this little girl doesn't have a powerful family background. She looks ordinary. When you become famous in the future, will you have to be afraid of not having a wife and concubines? I'm just a village hunter. I killed someone today because those people insulted my wife. If I saw that my wife had been defiled but still turned a blind eye to it and didn't seek justice for her, I wouldn't be considered a husband. I wouldn't even be considered a human. Oh Lord, you have many talents around you. I don't think you don't want a beast who kills his wife for glory. Lu Zhe didn't let Pei Qian urge him a third time. He looked up calmly and looked at Pei Qian. He rejected the request. Even if I want you to die next. Pei Qian wasn't too surprised by Lu Zhe's rejection. He just put down the dagger in his hand regretfully and took the handkerchief Qian he handed over. He slowly wiped his slender fingers. Don't you think it's a pity? I heard that you're the only one left in your family. Is it worth it to make your family go extinct for a woman? Even if we go extinct, it's better than losing my conscience and living in this world in shame. Lu Zhe didn't compromise at all and replied straightforwardly. Seeing that Lu Zhe couldn't be persuaded, Pei Qian paused and looked at Lin Suisui, who was sitting at the side. At this moment, she was no longer worried and frightened. Her eyes, which had never moved away from her husband, were filled with gratitude and admiration. Her joy was almost overflowing. This made Pei Qian feel a little uncomfortable, but soon, the discomfort disappeared. What about you? Are you touched now that your husband didn't give up on you for his future? Do you really think that what he's doing now is a good thing for you? Have you ever wondered if he will regret today's decision when your lives become unsustainable in the future? If he regretted it at that time, you would be the best scapegoat to bear his anger and dissatisfaction. At that time, you'll be in eternal hell. You'll be better off dead. It had to be said that Pei Qian was really a sadist. Lin Suisui couldn't help but criticize him inwardly. He looked glorious, but in fact, there seemed to be no sunlight in his heart. No matter what he looked at, he seemed to only see the dark side of the entire matter. However, Lin Suisui knew that she couldn't express anything at this moment. She was silent for a long time before turning to look at Pei Qian calmly. I believe in my husband. He's not the kind of person you're talking about. Along the way, we had all escaped death. If not for my husband protecting me, I would have died hundreds of times. Therefore, no matter what choice he made today, I wouldn't blame him. Besides, who knew what would happen in the future? My husband said that we went to the northern region together to seek a way out. As long as my husband and I are united and hardworking, we won't starve to death. I'm not afraid. Pei Qian laughed this time. He rocked back and forth as if he had heard a huge joke. He only stopped when tears fell. He stood up and threw away the handkerchief in his hand. He looked at Lu Zhe and Lin Suisui with a smile. All right, I'll wait and see. I want to see how long you two can share happiness and bitterness for. After saying that, he didn't stay any longer. He turned around and left with his group. After looking at the backs of Pei Qian and the others, Lin Suisui lowered her head and looked at the plate filled with roasted meat that the follower had forcefully stuffed into her hands. It had to be said that this person was a little awkward, but his knife skills were really good. The thickness of these meat slices was almost the same. He was even more precise than if he had used a ruler. Pei Qian is now in charge of the prison. Lu Zhe saw her staring at the plate in her hand and leaned over at the right time. He almost whispered in her ear, it said that he prefers to carry out the punishment himself. Lin Suisui immediately felt that the plate of meat in her hand wasn't tasty anymore. Chapter 17 You are listening at NovelFull.audio. Entering the mountain just as Lu Zhe had said to Lin Suisui, Pei Qian was ruthless this time. Previously, in the refugee camp, anyone who took the initiative to form a gang to snatch the property of others would be killed on the spot. As for those who participated, regardless of gender, they would be whipped 50 times. As for people like Lu Zhe and the others, who counterattacked and killed people because they resisted others' plundering, they were all innocent. Although the soldiers in Pei Qian's hands didn't interfere in the battle between these refugees these days, they knew everything that had happened. Therefore, they quickly dragged those who were about to be punished out of the crowd in batches. In this weather and environment, it was actually more difficult to endure 50 whips than to be killed directly. Moreover, Pei Qian didn't give these injured refugees any time to rest. The next morning, he announced that they would continue on their way as planned. As for those who had been whipped, no matter how painful it was, they had no choice but to force themselves to move forward with the refugees. Many people fainted halfway, but they didn't receive any mercy. Instead, the soldiers became more ruthless and urged them by punching and kicking them. On the first day, 2 more people died on the journey. After this battle, the remaining refugees in the refugee camp could be said to have been completely subdued. Now, not to mention seeing Pei Qian and the others, even when they heard Pei Qian's name, many of them couldn't help but shiver. After they crossed the river, it was as if the world had changed. As they went further north, everyone saw lush greenery again. However, compared to the flatland previously, the road now was clearly more winding. The rolling mountains stretched into the distance. It was difficult to find flat ground like before in their current camp. They could only camp on the hillside or in the mountains. The current environment made many refugees feel much more relaxed. After all, if the environment along the way was harsh, how would they survive in the future? Although it was just autumn, it wasn't difficult to find food in the forest. Therefore, after being silent for so many days, there was finally rare laughter in the refugee camp. Lin Suisui was also very happy. She hadn't only found wild vegetables that could be used to make soup, but also many herbs. There were even 2 types of herbs that could help Lu Zhe eliminate poison. Lu Zhe also entered the mountain. When he came out, he not only carried 2 hares, but also took out a few yellow wild persimmons and handed them to Lin Suisui. You can't eat it now, but you can in a few days. Lu Zhe seemed to be afraid that Lin Suisui didn't know, so he didn't forget to remind her before he left. Lu Zhe and Lin Suisui's activities in the refugee camp were quickly reported to Pei Qian. He couldn't understand why his prince cared so much about this ordinary refugee couple. Therefore, after replying this time, he couldn't help but ask the question on his mind. Do you really think those 2 are very ordinary? Pei Qian seemed to be in a good mood today. When he heard Qian He's question, he looked up from the various letters in front of him and glanced at him with a faint smile. Although those people seem to have died from heavy punches, many details are often covered by these facts. We can put the others aside, but don't you find the puncture wound on one of them familiar? You're talking about the injured and murdered ministers from the East Palace. Previously, Qian He, who was the last to leave the East Palace, had also accompanied them. The other palace servants who had been killed were dispensable, but what left a deep impression on Qian He was the minister who had died in the crown prince's bedchamber. The golden hairpin that sank into his skull was clearly a fatal wound, but the wound on his neck was clearly identical to that of this refugee who had been killed. This is just my hypothesis. Perhaps it's just a coincidence. Pei Qian glanced at the dark night outside the tent. After a long time, he said, they're just curious. They were curious about how long the couple could last in such a difficult environment. Qian He didn't dare to ask further. He quietly left the tent and didn't disturb Pei Qian anymore. After the previous incident, almost half of the refugees in the refugee camp had been killed. The officials who were in charge of this were naturally anxious. However, seeing that Pei Qian still looked indifferent, they didn't dare to go forward and say anything else. They could only think of ways to maintain the remaining number of people. At the very least, they couldn't lose any more people. The benefit of this worry was that Lu Zhe, Lin Suisui, and the others had 2 days to rest. Because they were not in a hurry to travel, many people planned to hurry up and find more food to bring along. Therefore, early the next morning, Lu Zhe decided to enter the mountain early to try his luck. However, just as he decided to set off this time, he was stopped by Lin Suisui, who was carrying a basket on her back. I want to go too. Lin Suisui tugged at Lu Zhe's collar and refused to let go. There were very few herbs to be found in the periphery of the forest, but it was too dangerous to go deeper into the forest. No matter how bold she was, she didn't dare to act rashly. Seeing that Lu Zhe had plans to go deeper into the forest, she was unwilling to let go. She naturally had to follow him no matter what. Lu Zhe only hesitated for a moment and didn't refuse. He only told her about the difficulties after entering the mountain. It's very dangerous inside and we still have to walk a long way. Think about it. If you're tired, I won't indulge you. I know. Don't worry, I won't run around. I'll listen to your arrangements, okay? Lin Suisui nodded. Anyway, no matter how difficult it was, she would put it aside for now as long as he agreed to bring her along. Seeing her like this, Lu Zhe didn't persuade her anymore. He reached out and unloaded the basket on her back, then turned around and led the way. Lin Suisui was stunned for a moment. Seeing that the man had already walked a few steps away, she didn't have the time to think about anything else and quickly followed him, as if she was afraid that he would regret it if she was too slow. Lu Zhe had entered the forest yesterday evening, so he became familiar with the route at first. He brought Lin Suisui through the forest, but this area had been visited by the surrounding refugees. They even encountered many refugees searching along the way. They didn't stop for long. After they passed through these people for another hour, the weeds under their feet finally began to become more lush, and the surrounding environment became more and more quiet. Only the mountain birds that were occasionally disturbed by their footsteps pulled their long tail feathers and flew across the mountain to cry uneasily. Chapter 18 You are listening at NovelFull.audio. Life and death. Because he had brought Lin Suisui with him, Lu Zhe didn't plan to go too deep into this forest. Therefore, after walking for about 2 hours, he stopped and settled Lin Suisui in this seemingly safe forest valley. The terrain here is relatively open. It's convenient to rest beside the stream. Stay here first. Remember not to go far. Lu Zhe turned around and handed the basket in his hand to Lin Suisui. At the same time, he didn't forget to instruct her carefully, I'll investigate the surroundings first, and I won't be gone for long. Lin Suisui nodded, indicating that she would listen to orders and not run around. Seeing that she was obedient, Lu Zhe didn't say anything else. He simply set off and did as he said. He checked the surroundings before leaving towards the deeper forest area. After Lu Zhe left, Lin Suisui first built a bonfire on the sandy ground by the stream according to Lu Zhe's instructions. Then, she turned around and went to the nearby bushes to look for the herbs she needed. This forest area looked like it was rarely visited. Along the way, she actually discovered many herbs hidden in the grass. However, due to the restrictions, she had no choice but to let go of those that were not easy to preserve for the time being. She only picked some of the most useful herbs and placed them in the basket behind her. Lin Suisui remembered that people had previously said that she could find good ginseng in the forest near the northern region. Although she didn't know how far this area was from their final destination, she still subconsciously wanted to try her luck. It had to be said that Lin Suisui was really lucky this time. Under an old cypress tree at the edge of the valley, she really saw a familiar red color. The fruit that was as red as flames was swaying behind the old cypress tree. Almost at a glance, Lin Suisui recognized that it was a very rare ginseng that was a certain age. Even though there was no one around, Lin Suisui still swallowed nervously. She quickly pulled a red thread from the belt around her waist and carefully walked over. According to her old custom, she tied the red thread to the branch of the ginseng. When this was done, Lin Suisui heaved a sigh of relief and began to dig carefully with the small hoe in her hand. She didn't dare to use too much strength. Afraid that she would damage the roots and destroy the medicinal properties, she simply scraped away the floating soil and used both hands for the rest. One had to know that the value of a complete ginseng and a slightly damaged ginseng was worlds apart. Lin Suisui's movements were extremely slow. Under the sunlight pouring down through the gaps in the leaves above her head, she didn't even bother to take a sip of water. She was focused on the rare ginseng in front of her. The entire excavation process was extremely slow. It took almost 2 hours. It wasn't until Lin Suisui took the entire ginseng out of the soil intact that she fell to the ground weakly. She endured the numbness in her legs and laughed foolishly. This ginseng looked to be about 30 years old. Although it didn't look too old, it was slender. One look and one could tell that it was a top-grade ginseng. Lin Suisui didn't dare to delay. She sat on the ground to rest for a while before pushing herself up. She wanted to go to the riverbank to pack this ginseng properly. If it was damaged because it wasn't preserved well, it would be her loss. She stood up and took 2 steps towards the riverbank in a good mood before she sensed that something was wrong behind her. The movement of something moving in the shadows made her nervous again. At first, she thought that it was a refugee who had entered the depths of the forest to try his luck like them, so she subconsciously tightened her grip on the silver hairpin that had been hidden in her sleeve. She turned around warily and waited for the bushes to move before shouting, "Who is it?" Although this shout wasn't loud, it was still imposing. However, Lin Suisui stood where she was and waited warily for a long time. However, there was no more movement from the bushes. Everything returned to calm. Could it be that she was mistaken? Lin Suisui carefully took 2 steps back. Although she doubted herself, she didn't let down her guard. As she carefully moved back, the bushes, which had regained their calm, finally rustled again. When Lin Suisui saw her target walking out of there, she was stunned. She had always heard that there were ferocious tigers in the forest in the north, but she didn't expect to be so lucky. It was her first time entering the mountain and she had encountered such a big treasure. However, after her initial panic, her survival instincts quickly calmed her down. It was also because of this calmness that she could tell at a glance that something was wrong with the tiger in front of her. It looked very dispirited. The tiger looked dispirited, as if it was sick. It even acted as if it didn't see Lin Suisui, who could be served as a snack, and didn't have any desire to hunt. The tiger took 2 more slow steps forward and stopped less than 5 steps away from Lin Suisui. But instead of moving forward, it stood there, staring at her. Although the tiger didn't seem to be attacking now, Lin Suisui didn't dare to move. She had heard before that ferocious beasts like tigers had always liked to eat living creatures. If you played dead and didn't move, it might not attack you. But if you panicked and ran around, you might become its meal in the next moment. The human and tiger looked at each other for a moment. Although she felt that it was a little ridiculous, Lin Suisui felt that perhaps this tiger wanted her help with something. Thinking of this, Lin Suisui hesitated and finally decided to follow her intuition and try her luck. She mustered her courage and asked the tiger in front of her in a low voice, "You, Tiger King, is there anything you need my help with?" The tiger stared at her for a long time without making a sound, but it still had no intention of attacking. Seeing this, Lin Suisui felt a little relieved. She licked her lips and took a step forward carefully before asking in a low voice, "Well, if you're feeling unwell, I have some medical skills. Perhaps I can help you." It was unknown if the tiger was annoyed by Lin Suisui's words or if it was alarmed by her move, but it suddenly opened its mouth and roared at Lin Suisui, roar. Chapter 19. You are listening at NovelFull.audio. Sucker. The fierce tiger roar shocked the birds. Lin Suisui was also shocked. She subconsciously closed her eyes and waited for death to come. However, she didn't feel anything even ominous after waiting for a long time. Stunned, she opened her eyes tentatively and saw the tiger opening its mouth at her. However, it didn't make another move. With Lin Suisui's delay, the tiger seemed to be getting impatient. Lin Suisui didn't dare to be negligent. This tiger wouldn't open its mouth and rush at her for no reason, so there must be a reason. She took a hesitant step forward and was relieved when the tiger didn't move. She boldly took 2 more steps forward until she was close to the tiger's big head and looked into its mouth. Without much effort, she saw a broken bone spike stuck in the tiger's molar. It was probably because it had been stuck in for too long that the wound was already a little festering. This wound was neither big nor small, but it was really not an easy thing for this tiger to remove. Not only did it affect its eating, but if it continued to worsen, it might even affect its hunting. If she were to treat this wound, it wouldn't take much effort. However, the patient in front of her wasn't a human she could communicate with, but a tiger that could eat her at any time. If she wanted to treat the wound, she had to reach into the tiger's mouth. Moreover, pulling out the bone spike and cleaning the wound might bring intense pain and stimulation. If she was careless, her hand would be crippled on the spot. However, if she didn't help Ida, it seemed that the outcome wasn't any better. This tiger would definitely not let her off easily. Lin Suisui only considered it for a moment before making a decision. She looked up at the tiger and whispered to it, "I can help you treat your injuries, but it will hurt a little. Can you bear it? If possible, nod your head." When she said this, even she herself felt that she was crazy. She was actually chatting with a tiger here. However, what surprised Lin Suisui even more was that the tiger actually nodded at her. Then, it looked very obedient and opened its mouth again. It even leaned towards Lin Suisui with a fawning expression, looking like it couldn't wait. Lin Suisui took a deep breath. Seeing that the patient was so cooperative, she decided to take the risk. She wasn't in a hurry to pull out the bone spike for the tiger. Instead, she explained in a low voice, "Don't be anxious. We have to find some herbs to treat your injuries first, that I can also help you recognize a herb. This way, after I treat you this time, you have to find that herb and chew it every day for the next period of time. It can help you recover faster." The tiger was very understanding. When it heard Lin Suisui's words, it was very cooperative and followed behind her. It actually really watched her dig out the herb that stopped bleeding and anti-inflammatory in the grass. In the end, it even cleverly found one for Lin Suisui to see and passed the test. Lin Suisui brought the tiger back to the riverbank. She first washed away the herbs she had found, then found a stone to crush. Then, she turned around and whispered to the tiger, "I'm going to start pulling out that bone spike for you now. Also, that bone spike has been in your mouth for too long and has festered. Therefore, not only am I going to help you pull out that spike, but I am also going to clean up the surrounding pus, blood, and rotten flesh and apply herbs. This process will be a little uncomfortable. You have to endure it." The tiger squatted in front of Lin Suisui and nodded obediently. Then it opened its mouth at her again. Lin Suisui calmed herself and reached into the tiger's mouth. She was steady and fast during the pulling of the bone spike. It didn't cause much discomfort to the tiger. The greater challenge was actually the subsequent debridement and removal of the pus. Fortunately, the tiger kept its promise and didn't attack at all from the beginning to the end. It wasn't until Lin Suisui carefully smeared the green herbs on the tiger's wound that it heaved a sigh of relief. The mountain breeze blew and she felt a chill run down her back. Only then did she realize that her back had been drenched in sweat for a while. "Alright." Lin Suisui looked at the tiger and instructed it as if it was a patient she had treated before, "Remember, if you can, it's best to chew more of the herbs I found for you. Don't forget to chew more after you eat. Even if your injuries recover in the future, you can continue to maintain this habit. Anyway, it won't do you any harm." As she spoke, Lin Suisui couldn't help but reach out and touch the top of the tiger's head. The feeling of touching it was like touching a big cat, making her suddenly feel a sense of accomplishment. Which doctor could treat tigers in the forest like her? The tiger seemed to be in a good mood. It purred at Lin Suisui before turning around and disappearing into the forest. Seeing that the tiger had really left, Lin Suisui finally relaxed. After heaving a long sigh of relief, she felt tired and hungry. The bonfire she had built earlier had long been extinguished, but she couldn't care less now. She took out the half piece of rabbit jerky from the basket and wolfed it down a few times to ease the discomfort of her hunger. However, Lin Suisui didn't rest for long when she was shocked to see that the tiger that had hidden itself in the forest had returned again. Moreover, it seemed to be holding something in its mouth. Lin Suisui blinked. Could it be that this tiger also knew that a patient had to pay the doctor a fee? Only when the tiger approached did Lin Suisui see with a dumbfounded expression that the thing dangling in the tiger's mouth was actually a little white tiger. The tiger came over with the thin little white tiger. Without any hesitation, it placed the cub in front of Lin Suisui. Then, it lowered its head and licked the tiger cub's head. It raised its head and growled at Lin Suisui before turning around and leaving. Lin Suisui looked at the pitiful tiger cub on the ground and then at the tiger that walked away without looking back. She immediately felt helpless. It seemed that this tiger cub was the child of that ferocious tiger. Then could it be that it wanted to use this cub as a consultation fee? Did she look like a sucker? Chapter 20. You are listening at novelfull.audio. The treatment fee from the fierce tiger. Although she was a little dissatisfied with the fierce tiger's attitude, she couldn't bear to leave the poor little fellow on the ground alone. After bending down to pick up the cub and checking it, Lin Suisui understood why the tiger had made this choice. In this dynasty, white tigers were generally respected as auspicious. However, in fact, she had heard her master mention before that this kind of auspicious creature was usually quite weak when it was young. In the wild, it was a rare existence, so it was especially precious. It was the same for the little white tiger. The tiger must have sensed that its chances of survival were slim if it stayed by its side, so it wanted to send it over and see if Lin Suisui could save its life. Lin Suisui sighed. Although she was in a difficult position, looking at the little tiger cub, who had already spread its stomach and was sleeping soundly on her knee, she couldn't bear to abandon this little fellow. Forget it. No matter what, she would do her best. Since she had decided to raise this little tiger cub, Lin Suisui felt that she should take advantage of the current opportunity to make some corresponding preparations. For example, she could find some nourishing herbs. When the time came, she could stew soup with the meat for the little tiger cub to strengthen its body. Lin Suisui carefully placed the cub in the basket and continued to search for usable herbs in this area. When she returned to the stream, she was shocked to discover that there were two prey that had just stopped breathing beside the bonfire where she had been resting. When she took a closer look, Lin Suisui couldn't help but let out a low cry. They were musks. Moreover, they were two male musks that were not easy to capture. Looking at the fatal wounds on their necks, Lin Suisui didn't need to guess to know who had sent these two males over. These were the treatment fee and support fee from the ferocious tiger. Just as Lin Suisui was in a daze, a familiar deep male voice sounded from the side. Lu Zhe was carrying 4 hares in his hand. When he saw the two male musks in front of Lin Suisui, he was also shocked. It wasn't that he couldn't get his hands on such a large prey, but under the current conditions, even if he caught such a large prey, it wouldn't be easy to keep and carry. That was why he had set his sights on easier prey like wild rabbits. However, he didn't expect this little girl to give him such a big surprise. The consultation fee and child support fee. Lin Suisui didn't hide it from Lu Zhe. As she reached out for his dagger to dig for musk, she briefly explained what had happened after he left. Then, she sighed helplessly. I have no choice. I can't really leave this tiger cub alone. You're too bold. Even though Lin Suisui had said everything nonchalantly, Lu Zhe couldn't help but worry for her. If she wasn't careful, she would have been bitten by a ferocious tiger. Lu Zhe was silent for a moment. Before Lin Suisui could respond, he continued, It's my fault. He blamed himself for this. I was too careless. I only wanted to look around once and mistakenly thought that this place should be safe. If there's another chance to enter the mountain like this next time, you'd better follow me. Lu Zhe really felt that not only was Lin Suisui lucky this time, but he was also lucky. Otherwise, he would really only be able to see Lin Suisui. Then what about this tiger cub? As Lu Zhe spoke, Lin Suisui had already taken out the sachet on the two male musks' navel. She didn't forget to wash her hands and carry the white tiger cub out of the basket. She held it in front of Lu Zhe like she was presenting a treasure. Keep it. Lu Zhe could tell at a glance that Lin Suisui liked it, so he didn't raise any objections. However, looking at this weak tiger cub, he was more or less worried. However, this tiger cub's health is probably not very good. If we keep it, it might not be able to grow up. I'll try my best. As Lin Suisui spoke, she seemed to have thought of something and stuffed the tiger cub into Lu Zhe's arms. She turned around and hurriedly took out the ginseng that she had wrapped tightly from the basket on her back and handed it to Lu Zhe. Look, I even dug this up today. There's a ginseng about 30 years old. Although I didn't find any herbs that can be used to detoxify you, it's still a good harvest. Originally, she had wanted to sell this ginseng for money after settling down. However, after obtaining 2 large pieces of musk, she changed her mind. She could keep this ginseng and nourish Lu Zhe's body when she helped him remove the poison later. The poison in my body is not urgent. I'm already suffering from an old illness. It doesn't matter if it's 1 more day or 1 less day. After knowing that Lin Suisui wanted to enter the mountain whenever she had the chance to help him find herbs to detoxify the poison, it was impossible for Lu Zhe not to be moved. Therefore, after some thought, he whispered to Lin Suisui, if you're taking such a risk to find herbs, there's really no need. That's not right. Lin Suisui shook her head and turned to look at Lu Zhe very seriously. She said word by word, you have to treat your illness. The poison in your body will harm your body as long as it's there. How could she not take it seriously? I'm a doctor. It's my duty to treat illnesses and save people. How can I shrink back just because I encounter a little difficulty? Besides, it's not like I didn't gain anything. Think about it, which doctor can treat a tiger like me and even receive the tiger's consultation fee? At this point, Lin Suisui's face was flushed, and her tone couldn't hide her excitement and joy. Today's encounter was enough for her to brag for 10 years in the future. No, even forever. Then, I'll accompany you next time. Lu Zhe looked at Lin Suisui's happy expression and refrained from dissuading her. Forget it. Thinking about how rare it was for her to be so relaxed and happy along the way, he decided to let her be. Lin Suisui nodded. Anyway, she was happy now, so she was naturally more easygoing when she talked to him. Moreover, she wasn't an ungrateful person. She was already blessed by the heavens to have survived such a calamity. Who could guarantee that the next tiger she encountered would be a patient and not a hunter? After packing up briefly, the 2 of them planned to walk back. Although it was inconvenient to carry big prey, there was no reason to throw out food that was delivered to their door. Lu Zhe went to the side and found some mountain vines. He tied the 2 wontons to the basket on his back and carried the prey on his back alone. He slowly rushed back with Lin Suisui. However, this joy didn't last long. They were blocked by a few uninvited guests on the mountain path not far from the camp.